Hi, it's Karen Robertson with Digital Kids Author. So you want to do a book app, where do you start? In my previous blog posts, I focused more on why you might want to turn your book into an app. What's the difference between an ebook and a book app? Now we're going to start getting into how you actually put an app together. The first thing you need to do is you need to assess your story or your book so you can create a brief. Why is the brief so important? Well, it helps you get clear on what you want your book app to be and what you want that app to do. It also helps developers determine if they can develop what it is that you want, and it helps them quote accurately on your job. Your best friends when creating your brief are going to be other book apps. There are 4 key steps to creating your brief. The first one is to assess your story. The second is to look at other apps and start documenting what you want, asset by asset, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. The third is looking at your structural schematic if you need one, and the fourth one is putting together a page-by-page brief. First, let's look at assessing your story. You'll need to look at your story and the content you have and work out what you want your book app to be. What's unique about your story? Is there a natural fit for interactivity? For example, a treasure hunt adventure story would naturally make you think that you want to do some kind of a treasure hunt or do something adventurous. What bonus material will extend the story or content experience? Study other book apps to find this out. One thing to keep in mind is it's great to create what it is that you ideally want, but depending on which developer you go with, some of them will be able to do what you want and others won't, and some will mandate a certain style. So you will need to investigate that as you go through the process. But the first thing you need to do is you need to think, okay, in an ideal world, what do I want? So let's look at creating your brief. You need to decide what functionality your app's going to have and document this. And the best thing to do is to look at other apps to help you define it. So I've given you a little checklist here, and these are the things that you will want to be thinking about and have in your brief. Do you want text highlighting? What's your page design going to look like? How are you going to manage the text layout itself? Narration, sound effects, music, animation, and other content. And what I'm going to do now is just step you through each of these page by page so you start to have an idea of what I mean. First of all, what do you want text highlighting? Do you want text highlighting or not? And if you do you want it to be phrase by phrase or word by word? In Treasure Kind of Lost Gold of Shark Island, we use phrase by phrase highlighting, and the reason for this is because our readers are a little bit older. This book is not for the beginning reader. But in Hide, Run, Growl, the word by word text highlighting is the technique that they use, so each word lights up as it's spoken with the narration. Now text highlighting goes away when the read to me mode is not on. So if you're reading something myself, then of course the text highlighting is not on. Now when it comes to text layout, there are a lot of different approaches, so you'll look at different apps, but I've put 3 here, and it's part of what design you use will depend on what your objective is with text. So if we look at these examples here, this is one of the stories from Treasure Kind, The Lost Gold of Shark Island, and you'll see there's a story text box. Now Treasure Kind and The Lost Gold of Shark Island was written and was inspired by reluctant readers. And so we knew that when we put this book together that reluctant readers feel a bit taken aback when there's too much text on a page. It can be quite confronting. So the way that the text works for Treasure Kind, The Lost Gold of Shark Island is that only about 6 lines of text show at any one time, and then the text advances within the same box. Another approach is to have the text completely separate from the illustration in its own little section. And this works well if you have short copy or long copy. And then another example of text design is a fine musician, and this app does a beautiful job with right justification and central. They also do centered and left justified text as well. It's a beautiful app for text design. Now when it comes to narration, what do you want? Do you want the author or do you want a professional? Now a lot of people think, oh, that their voice is pretty nice and that they can narrate, but very few people actually have a really professional, good sounding narration, and narration can be so distracting if it's not done really, really well. So if an author really wants to do narration, if you want to narrate your own book, if you've got a really good voice, that's great. But if you really want to narrate but you're not sure your voice is as strong as it could be, then you might want to look at an option of having two different narrations, so someone can listen to you read and then someone can listen to the professional reader as well. Do you want a male or a female or a child? What kind of accent do you want? Now, about 75 to 80% of our Treasure Kai sales are in the U.S., so for us it was really important that the accent be an accent that would sound good to the American ear. So I just wanted to give you this overview, because when it comes to narration, a lot of people know automatically that they think that their book would sound right being narrated by a man or a woman. But do think about it and then have a look at different apps and listen to the narration and see what you like. Now when it comes to sound and sound effects, it can really make a beautiful difference in your app. There are two key types of sounds. One is background noise. So when you land on a page, do you hear beach noises or do you hear crickets and nighttime sounds? And then there are sound sprites. So sounds that trigger either by something that's happening in the text when you get to that point in the narration, or things that when you touch something, when a child touches something on the screen, a sound makes. This is a scene from Treasure Kai in the treasure shop. And when a child touches different things, it makes noises, like the railroad crossing makes a railroad crossing sound. What do you want with music? So there are three options. No music at all. The Lorax is a beautiful example of an app that doesn't have music throughout the whole app. Instead, it uses beautiful background sounds to create an incredible mood. It uses wind and creaking sounds and even birds making noise. So definitely have a listen to that if you want to look at how you can create a mood without music. Or you can source royalty-free music. Open Wide Snap is an example of an app that uses royalty-free music in a nice way. Or you can have an original score written. And it's actually not that expensive to have an original score written, and it can really lend to a complete cinematic feel. With Treasure Kai and the Lost Gold of Shark Island, we have a theme, and then we also have cues written for each of the pages, and it just sets the whole scene for the app and makes it quite cinematic in feel. What do you want with your animation? Again, you're going to have different types of animation. You'll have movement on a page, that when you land on a page and you open that page, there are things moving. I call that automatic animation, so it's things that create a mood. And then you'll have touch-based animation, so things that when you touch them, they move. What do you want with other activity and interactivity and content? So there are really three different types of interactivity when it comes to apps. And you'll see lots of apps and they're called interactive, but there are different types. The first type is interactivity that actually brings the reader into the narrative. Not many book apps actually do this. One of the ones that does is Treasure Kai and the Lost Gold of Shark Island, here on the right. It's a treasure hunt adventure story, so there are clues that fly out of treasure chests and then scramble over the little treasure chests and then disappear. And the way that the book is progressed is kids randomly choose treasure chests. They'll tap a treasure chest and they'll either find the gold and finish the story, or they'll reveal a clue and they'll get the accompanying adventure story revealed. And the reader keeps tapping the treasure chests and reading the adventure stories until he or she finds the gold. And they may find the gold with the first chest they open. It might take 2 or 3, or it might take all 8. But there are over 13,000 paths to the gold. So with that example, the interactivity, the touching, actually progresses the story, so it brings the reader into the narrative. Then there are other types of interactivity that sit well within the narrative but aren't necessarily part, bringing the reader completely into the narrative. Morris Lesmore in the Fantastic Flying Books of Morris Lesmore is a great example of that. Beautiful, wonderful interactivity, and uses iPad functionality in ways that I've not seen any other book app do. So it's definitely worth having a look at. And it sits well within the story. And then there are other apps that have bonus content. So, for example, Miss Spider's bedtime story here on the bottom right, it has a story that you can read when you're in the read mode, but then it's also got a watch mode, so you can watch video. It's got match for a matching game, paint for a painting game, and puzzle for puzzling games. And then you've got It's Cool to Be Clever as well, which has a lot of bonus content. So It's Cool to Be Clever is the story of Edson Hendricks, who helped invent the design for the internet. But in this app, you not only have his story, but you also have video interviews with Edson Hendricks himself. You have information on bullying. You have trip reports about meetings that he had. It's a really rich experience. So you can think about what types of content and interactivity do you want to be included in your app, and that's going to be included in your brief. Next, you want to look at your schematic flow. Now, you'll only need to do a schematic for the flow of your book if it's going to be nonlinear, or if it's going to be a little bit different. If it's a basic book with turning pages, then you won't have to worry about this. But with Treasure Kai and the Seven Cities of Gold, which is the sequel to Treasure Kai and the Lost Gold of Shark Island, we have, again, it's highly interactive, and we've got the random choosing of treasure chests again, but it works different from the first book. But I did this schematic so I could explain how the storybook works. So basically at the top here it says cover to page 17, and essentially the book just works like a regular storybook app. From the cover to page 17, you just turn it. But then you land on a map page where the clues come out and the treasure chests scramble, and then there's a process that you go through. But this is the type of schematic you do if you're doing a sophisticated app that isn't linear. Another example of an app that would need a schematic is Violet and the Mystery Next Door, because it has some choose your own path decision points within the book. So if you're going to do something like a choose your own adventure, then you'll probably want to draw out some kind of schematic as well, so that your developer knows how the app is structured. Finally, with creating your brief, you want to do a page-by-page brief. This is going to help you identify what assets you have and what you're going to need to create. It will also show the developer how much work is involved. There are a couple ways you can do this. There are actually a number of ways, but I'm going to show you two. One is via an Excel spreadsheet where you have a row for each illustration, and the other is if your book is printed, you might actually want to mark it up or use post-it notes to plan your book app. I'll show you. So here's an example of a brief for Zak the Yak with books on his back, a printed book that was written by John Wood, who is a Room to Read founder, and he created that book that told the story of how he created Room to Read. So Zak the Yak, when it came to turning the book into an app, what we did was we took each illustration and we put it on a row. And then we looked at each illustration and we worked out what touch sprites we would want to have, what background sounds and music we would want to have on the page, what animations we would want to have, both automatic and touch triggered, and then the sound effects that we would need. And it was quite a good process to go through, because then we knew exactly what we needed to create. Or you could mark up your book. We actually did not do this for Treasure Kai, but I'm using my book as an example. Here you can see one of the printed pages, and you can see that I've marked it up with a marker, that I want the treasure chest to squeak when it's opened. I want the clues to fly out and scramble, and I've drawn myself little treasure chests that are the ovals down at the bottom of the page. And I've got a pointing to Kai there that he's snoring, and background sounds that are ocean sounds. So this is something you could do if you've got a printed book. Thanks for listening.